particular problems. The most widely accepted one among scientists at the moment is the one where the Earth was hit by a large object, planetary-sized object, soon after the formation of the solar system. This is known as the Big Whack theory. We looked at this extremely closely because it is the one that's accepted most now. The separation theory is less accepted, but it has its great problems. In order for this model to have worked, this extremely large body hit the Earth, the two planetary bodies coalesced and then came apart again, and the residue that was left formed into the Moon. The only problem is that computer models show that if this had happened, which is an extremely unlikely event in the first place, sometime later another impact was necessary, which was called Big Whack 2, coming from the opposite direction in order to slow down the Earth enough, because it would have been spinning so rapidly, it would still have been spinning much faster than it is at the moment. In fact, the more you look at either theory, the more you realise that they're not at all plausible. The only reason that they're used is because they're the only answers available. We know, for example, that the Moon was not a captured asteroid for the evidence that you've already outlined yourself. And none of the other theories from history stand up at all. So it only really leaves us with those two theories, and particularly with the Big Whack theory. But when you really look at it, it's so incredibly implausible that to suggest that the Moon is artificial is less implausible.
Oh, okay, as you two started putting together this theory, and there are some others out there who believe that the Moon is artificial. What does that say, though, about all the other moons around all the other planets in the solar system? Surely they can't be artificial, are they?
No, in fact, we're quite prepared to accept that every satellite in the solar system, apart from the Moon, is quite natural. There's nothing unusual about moons forming, but if you look at the general size and shape of moons in the solar system, they bear a strong relationship to the size of the host planet. Mars is very close to us, which also has satellites. It has two. They're extremely small, very rocky, and quite clearly are captured asteroids and are not part of the body of the planet itself. Our Moon is very different. We know for sure that the material that makes the Moon was once part of the Earth. We don't deny that. But it was only a part of the Earth. If you take the relative sizes of the Earth and the Moon is massive. It only takes 3.66 moons to make the size of the Earth. And the Moon is very, very light in weight. In other words, it has very little mass. So although we know for sure that it's part of the Earth, it's only a very selective part of the Earth. It's material that comes from very close to the surface. One would normally expect, with either of the theories that we mentioned, or with a captured asteroid, that you would get different findings. It's a very anomalous body.
Well, let's talk about the size, mass again, and also these orbital characteristics of the Moon as well. You are right. It is huge compared to other moons in relationship to their planet. It might include part of this large object that smashed into us. Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. Why is it unusual, though, in terms of the size and the mass? It is so big, but like you say, so light. Why is that unusual?
First of all, we've got to say that there is no evidence whatsoever for the planetary impactor. When something forms in a certain part of space, it develops a very specific chemical signature. Now, the Earth and the Moon share that chemical signature, but there is no signature of any other item that came in. So the proponents of the theory for the Big Whack cannot explain what happened to the planetary impactor. It certainly didn't become part of the mass because its signature is not there.
What about its orbit? Anything unusual here?
Its orbit has changed quite significantly. It's quite obvious, everybody knows, that the Moon is getting further and further from the Earth all the time. It's its orbit at this moment in time that particularly interests us, about 4.5 billion years after it was formed, because of the position of the Moon relative to the Earth and the Sun. We get total eclipses. An eclipse happens when the face of the Moon passes the face of the Sun. Now, there's nothing strange about the fact that the eclipse happens. What's really odd is that it's so perfect, because every so often the match as the moon passes across the face of the sun gives us a total eclipse. And it's not approximate, it's absolute. We say that, according to chance, this simply shouldn't happen.
One of our past guests, Christopher and Alan, suggested that the moon was towed into orbit. What's your take on that? You first, Christopher.
I don't think it was towed into orbit. I think it was created in its present position. Just to say, science fully understands that the strangest object in the whole known universe is our moon. It's our nearest neighbour, but it's the strangest thing. I mean, Erwin Shapiro from the Harvard-Smithsonian Centre for Astrophysics said the best explanation for the moon is observational error. The moon doesn't exist. There's big problems with this object, and it doesn't fit any normal explanation whatsoever. Our view is that it was made from materials taken from the surface, the tiny skim surface of the Earth, not from any large amount of the Earth, as you expect it was hit by an object. So a tiny skim was just sort of peeled off the surface of the Earth in some way, and we think it was formed in its original orbital position from this very light material that is on the surface of the Earth. So how that was done is, well, we debate that in the book, but there is no natural way it can exist, and there are a number of astrophysicists that accept that there is no explanation. It is very long indeed.
So you think the material, the makeup of the moon, that itself is not artificial?
No, the moon is made out of the surface material of the Earth. There is no doubt about that, zero doubt about that. But it doesn't have the heavy materials that the Earth has got, because obviously with the Earth, the heavy materials tend to sink towards the core, and we have different layers as it comes outwards. The outer layer of the Earth, the real skim surface, is what the moon is made of. I mean, the Pacific Basin, for instance, that is what largely where the moon came from.
All right, how could it have been manufactured, though? I mean, in essence, are you saying that there was nothing there prior to, or did they have something to sculpture and work with?
There was nothing there at all. The Earth was very young, but it was just a desolate ball of matter hurtling about. We're jumping the gun here, sort of, because the evidence that it is artificial is considerable, and it's only once you have to accept that you start to then consider, well, how can it exist? And then you've got to think about candidates. So half of our book, or more than half the book, discusses the evidence as to why the moon cannot be natural, and the last section deals with who did it, sort of detective work, and we can only think of three
reptilian
culprits, shall we say, for manufacturing the moon 4.6 billion years ago, and the technique
Here's
was
the
very
proof.
likely dependent on which of those three it was, but the fact remains that the only rational, sensible argument is that it was done artificially, and lots of scientists have said this before. We're not the first by any means, but we now know that whoever engineered it deliberately put a message in there, a very, very clear message to say, look what I've done, pay attention, you need to know this.
In terms of what the moon does for this planet, let's talk a little bit about that if we can, you two. What are the benefits? The moon is where it is, and because it is, it's done some things for our planet. Let's talk about some of those. Alan?
There are a massive amount of things that the moon has done for our
procreation
planet.
cycles.
Let's talk first of all about plate tectonics. This sounds a bit complicated, but it's what gives us a lot of our mountain ranges, and also what leaves us susceptible to
Ocean
earthquakes.
ties.
The surface of the Earth is composed of plates of material which are, if you like, floating on the underlying magma. These plates are massive, and they sometimes meet each other, and they've traversed the globe. Now, although it seems very inconvenient to us to have plate tectonics because of the earthquakes, at the same time, it's extremely important because it also produces volcanoes. Now, life demands certain prerequisites, and amongst these are the very minerals and the chemical building blocks upon which life is built. And without plate tectonics, life would therefore not happen. We would be in a very barren situation, like, for example, on Mars or on Venus, which have solid surfaces. The moon being so massive, first of all, prevented the planet planet from becoming solid in the first place. And also, because it was so close to the Earth at first and had a much lower orbit than it has now, it created huge tides every time it passed over. And that's what sparked off plate tectonics. And without those, then we most certainly wouldn't be here. Also, the Earth is a very unstable planetary body because of the nature of its core. And no scientist disagrees that left to its own devices, the Earth would keep toppling over, literally. The position of the Moon and the very specific orbit it occupies is what keeps the Earth upright on its orbit. And in addition to that, we need a very stable sort of seasonal element if life is going to develop on the Earth. If the Earth did not have the specific angle it has relative to the Sun, then we would end up with a situation whereby the equators would boil lead and the North and South Pole would be unbelievably cold. And there would be little or no temperate zone, and it's the temperate zones that really are the places where life formed and flourished. Once again, the Moon is primarily responsible for the fact that the Earth has the orbit that it has.
If the Moon was manufactured, how did they take this layer from the Earth and form it and shape it to form this massive structure called the Moon?
The most likely explanation for that, that we can see within our known understanding of physics, is that they probably used black hole technology. We're getting very close now to being able to create black holes. In fact, in only a few months, we will be in laboratory conditions in cyclotrons creating extremely small black holes. Once you know how to use a black hole, which is a device that has tremendous potential in terms of its gravitational pull, then you could string a whole series of shielded black holes around the infant Earth. These would be able to draw matter from the surface of the Earth, which would form a stream at the desired orbit around the black holes, and ultimately the black holes would be turned off, and this stream of matter would eventually coalesce, after millions of years of course, to become a viable satellite.
There is evidence
one of
for
the
that,
jobs that could have been used.
There is evidence for that.
Is there? No.
It's one of the strangest things about the Moon is that, as Carl Sagan said, you cannot have a natural planetary object that is hollow. And the Moon appears to be either hollow or have virtually no core. What it has got are areas called mass cons, which are areas of mass concentrations around the surface of the Moon. So instead of creating around a single core like every other body that we know of, it's got these mass cons under its surface distributed in different areas, as though each was attracting material to it, and the closer they got to it, the denser the material. And the early moon shots from both the Soviets and from American spacecraft crashed into the Moon because they assumed it was like every other object, and they calculated their landing on the basis of an object that got denser towards the center. Even now, when a vehicle flies across the surface of the Moon, it goes up and down as it goes because of these areas of strange concentration of mass, which is entirely in accordance with the idea that a series of centers, such as miniature black holes, was used to create the Moon. No, there is no explanation for these mass cons at all.
What about the possibility that the Moon is a huge spacecraft? Is that far-fetched?
That's nonsense. Absolute nonsense. It is a spacecraft because it's flying in space, but it is not alien. There is no doubt whatsoever. Scientifically, it's impossible for it to come from anywhere else. It is part of the Earth and was manufactured from materials taken from the Earth, although it doesn't obey any of the rules of a natural space object.
That's not true.
When we come back, let's find out when you think this was manufactured. Lots more to talk about right here on Coast to Coast AM. I'm George Noory.
Those bands are made
Susan
out
sends
of
me this email.
titanium,
George, I'm a retired
12%.
police officer living in Miami now. I feel great. At your recommendation, I became a sponsor to an 8-year-old through Children International. In the spirit of the season, it's the least I could do to help make a young child's life just a little bit healthier and happier. As a child, I was always well provided for, and it puts a